Have you ever wondered what truly drives personality change over a lifetime? It's not just early childhood. Rather, it's a lifelong negotiation with society itself. That is the core idea behind Erikson's psychosocial theory. Erikson dramatically expanded on Freud's ideas, emphasizing the enormous influence of culture and social interaction on who we become. His work is based on the epigenetic principle that our development unfolds in 8 predetermined stages, where each phase builds upon the previous one. In this video, we are going to dive into those 8 stages, breaking down the crisis, the essential virtue, and the 2 extremes of imbalance, the maladaptive tendency and the malignant tendency. Let's learn the essential vocabulary, as Erikson's terms have precise meanings. Crisis. This is the major psychosocial challenge prominent at that specific stage. It is a necessary turning point where the individual must negotiate between 2 opposing forces. These are, first, syntonic element, the positive, healthy psychological quality or force within the crisis. This is the quality we strive to achieve. Second, dystonic element, the negative, challenging psychological quality or force within the crisis. But it is important to note that Erikson argues that a small amount of dystonic quality is necessary for balanced growth. Virtue, the ego strength or healthy personality trait that emerges from the successful and balanced resolution of the crisis. This virtue becomes a lasting part of the personality. Maladaptive tendency. This is the imbalance resulting from too much of the syntonic or positive element and too little of the dystonic element. It is often too much of a good thing. Malignant tendency. It is the imbalance resulting from too much of the dystonic or negative element and too little of the syntonic element. This leads to profound psychological issues. Now, let us go through all the 8 stages, starting with stage 1, trust versus mistrust, which occurs during infancy. The main goal in this stage is to gain a basic sense of security and reliance on caregivers. So, the syntonic element is trust, developed through consistent, responsive care from their caregiver. For example, a baby who is consistently fed and comforted when crying. The dystonic element is mistrust, born from unreliable or neglectful care. For example, a baby whose cries are ignored or whose needs are met inconsistently. As discussed, a healthy resolution requires a balance, mostly trust, but enough mistrust to avoid being a, in quote, gullible fool. When this balance is achieved, they develop the virtue of hope, the expectation that things will work out. For example, a child knows that the parent will return after a brief separation. The maladaptive tendency of this would then be sensory maladjustment from too much trust, or the syntonic element. This would lead to someone being overly naive or easily fooled. On the other hand, the malignant tendency would be withdrawal from too much mistrust. This is characterized by depression, paranoia, and psychosis. Stage 2, autonomy versus shame and doubt, which occurs around 1.5 to 3 years old. The main goal in this stage is to achieve a sense of personal control over physical skills and a sense of independence. The syntonic element is autonomy, the drive to assert independence over physical skills like walking and self-care. For example, a toddler successfully insists on choosing a toy or tries to dress themselves. However messily, the dystonic element is shame and doubt, which develops if a child is harshly criticized or over-controlled. For example, a parent constantly rushes the child or makes fun of their attempts at self-care. A healthy resolution requires a balance that allows freedom while ensuring safety. When this balance is achieved, they develop the virtue of will, a sense of personal control control and the ability to act with intention. For example, the child shows that they want and can put on clothes by themselves. The maladaptive tendency is impulsivity from too much autonomy. This is acting without reflection or self-control. The malignant tendency is compulsiveness from too much shame and doubt. This is a rigid, anxious need for everything to be perfect and controlled. Stage 3, initiative versus guilt, which occurs around 3 to 5 years or preschool age. The main goal in this stage is to learn to plan and initiate activities, successfully mastering new challenges. The syntonic element is initiative, the capacity to plan, imagine, and create games. For example, a preschooler creates a complex role-playing game and organizes friends to play it. The dystonic element is guilt, which is necessary for moral judgment but can be excessive if the child is constantly criticized for their actions or creativity. For example, a child is harshly scolded for making a mess or asking too many inquisitive questions. A healthy resolution requires mostly initiative, while developing a conscience with healthy guilt to set moral boundaries. This balance yields the virtue of purpose, the courage to pursue goals without undue fear of punishment. For example, the child feels confident enough to set a goal and pursues it despite minor setbacks. The maladaptive tendency is ruthlessness from too much initiative. This is achieving goals without regard for ethics or the feelings of others. The malignant tendency is inhibition from too much guilt. This is a paralyzing fear of trying new things or taking action due to anticipated failure or moral criticism. Stage 4. Industry versus inferiority, which occurs around 5 to 12 years or school age. The main goal in this stage is to cope with new academic and social demands, developing a sense of competence. The syntonic element is industry, the feeling of competence and accomplishment derived from mastering skills valued by society. Example, a student feels pride after learning to tie their shoes or getting a good test score. The dystonic element is inferiority, a feeling of worthlessness due to consistent failure or ridicule when compared to peers. Example, a child is repeatedly made fun of for being bad at a required sport in gym class. A healthy resolution requires mostly industry, understanding one's limits, but maintaining self-worth. This balance yields the virtue of competence, the free exercise of dexterity and intelligence. For example, the child uses reading skills learned in school to research a topic they are curious about. The maladaptive tendency is narrow virtuosity from too much industry. This means becoming overly focused on one specific skill, like only academics, to the exclusion of all others. The malignant tendency is inertia from too much inferiority. This is a crippling sense of worthlessness and giving up entirely, a total lack of motivation. Stage 5. Identity versus role confusion, which occurs around 12 to 18 years of age or adolescence. The main goal in this stage is to achieve a sense of self, understanding roles, and integrating them into a unified, coherent personal identity. The syntonic element is identity, the coherent self-image that integrates all past experiences and current roles. Example, a teenager experiments with different music styles, political views, and future careers. The dystonic element is role confusion, the uncertainty about one's place in the world often called the identity crisis. For example, a young adult frequently changes majors, has no clear goals, and adapts the personality of their current friend group rather than creating or curating their own. A healthy resolution involves forming a clear, stable identity while accepting some level of complexity. This balance yields the virtue of fidelity, the ability to sustain loyalties freely pledged in spite of inevitable contradictions. For example, a young person commits to a value despite peer pressure to abandon it. For example, their choice to abstain from smoking. The maladaptive tendency is fanaticism from too much identity. This is being overly invested in a specific identity, becoming intolerant, dogmatic, and certain their way is the only way. The malignant tendency is repudiation from too much role confusion. This involves actively rejecting the need for an identity, rejecting adult responsibilities, or actively rejecting society. Stage 6. Intimacy versus isolation, which occurs around 18 to 40 years of age or young adulthood. The main goal in this stage is to form deep, committed, loving relationships with others. The syntonic element is intimacy, the capacity for close, reciprocal commitment and sharing. For example, two partners who merge their lives and share deep secrets and vulnerabilities without fear or judgment. The dystonic element is isolation, which is the fear of commitment, self-absorption, and loneliness. Example, a person who prefers superficial hookups, always keeping others at an emotional distance. A healthy resolution involves developing the capacity for deep love while maintaining an independent sense of self. This balance yields the virtue of love, mutuality of devotion, transcending separateness. For example, the commitment to a partner which endures through difficult, separate experiences like a job loss. The maladaptive tendency is promiscuity from too much intimacy. This is seeking shallow, non-committal relationships, sharing intimacy without true emotional commitment. The malignant tendency is exclusion from too much isolation. This is actively isolating oneself and developing a hostile or cold attitude towards others and relationships. Stage 7. Generativity versus stagnation, which occurs around 40 to 65 years of age, or middle adulthood. The main goal in this stage is to contribute to society and guide the next generation, thereby leaving a legacy. The syntonic element is generativity, the concern for establishing and guiding the next generation through parenting, mentoring, or creation. For example, a middle-aged person mentors a junior employee or is highly involved in community service. The dystonic element is stagnation, which is self-absorption, boredom, and a lack of purpose. For example, a person who focuses solely on buying things for themselves and expresses a deep boredom with their life. A healthy resolution involves contributing to the well-being of others while still maintaining self-care. This balance yields the virtue of care, the commitment to taking care of people, the products, and the ideas one has learned to care for. For example, a mentor dedicates substantial time to a protege, investing in the future of the field, not just their own gain. The maladaptive tendency is overextension from too much generativity. This means becoming so consumed with caring for others or work that they neglect their own needs or family. The malignant tendency is rejectivity from too much stagnation. This is failing to care for or actively rejecting members of society, leading to a sense of self-centeredness and lack of contribution. Finally, stage 8, ego integrity versus despair, which occurs around 65 years and above or old age. The main goal in this stage is to look back on life with a sense of fulfillment and acceptance. The syntonic element is ego integrity, the acceptance of one's life as having been meaningful and necessary, including all past choices and events. For example, an elder reviews their life and accepts all past choices, mistakes and all, as contributing to the whole person. The dystonic element is despair, which is regret over failures, a preoccupation of the what-ifs, and a feeling that life was wasted. For example, an elder expresses constant bitterness about missed opportunities and is terrified of death. A healthy resolution involves acceptance of life and death, achieving wisdom and finding meaning. This balance yields the virtue of wisdom, informed and detached concern with life itself in the face of death. For example, the individual can offer balanced, insightful advice on major challenges, understanding the relative nature of successes and failures. The maladaptive tendency is presumption from too much integrity. This is pretending to be wise without having truly integrated their life, becoming arrogant or dismissive about their past and the experiences of the upcoming generation. The malignant tendency is disdain from too much despair. This is contempt for life itself, both their own and others, marked by deep bitterness and regret. And those were the 8 stages of Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. Erikson showed us that life is a lifelong project of balancing extremes. The goal of development is the synthesis of the syntonic and dystonic forces to achieve the healthy virtue from each stage. Which stage are you negotiating right now? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth breakdowns. See you next time!